The night my wife told a room full of people she could drop me anytime, she thought she was making a joke. What she didn't realize was that she'd just ended our marriage. Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by again. I've got something new to share and honestly it's been weighing heavy on me. So here goes. The exact moment my wife, Amanda, casually joked at her company's party that she could drop me, Jason, anytime in front of her co-workers, that was when I knew. Right then and there, I realized the woman I had once thought I'd grow old with had, in her own careless way, ended our marriage without even knowing it. But let me back up and take you through how that night unfolded. Amanda had been going on about this big work event for weeks. Her department had just closed a huge deal, and to celebrate they were throwing a formal party. She made a point to invite me personally, saying she wanted me there as her date, her plus one. I remember feeling touched at the time, like maybe she still saw me as someone who mattered in her world. Looking back now, I should have caught the warning signs early. She spent more time deciding on her dress for that night than she did planning anything for our last anniversary. That should have told me something. The event was held at one of those high-end venues you'd expect from a company riding high on success. Ornate crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, polished marble floors reflected the light like a mirror, and the open bar was already pouring drinks like there was no tomorrow. The second we stepped through those double doors, it was like Amanda flipped a switch. During the ride over, she had barely spoken to me, eyes glued to her phone, offering the occasional short response. But once we were inside, suddenly she was lit up, glowing, flashing smiles, laughing, oozing charm. The only problem? None of it was meant for me. There's the regional director, she whispered, already halfway across the room. I really need to make a strong impression. And just like that, she slipped away into the crowd, leaving me behind like some awkward plus one she didn't actually want tagging along. I grabbed a whiskey from the bar and found a spot where I could watch the chaos unfold. That's when I noticed him, the executive chef they'd brought in for the night. His name was Brandon. Tall guy, carried himself with a kind of effortless confidence. He wore his chef's coat like it was a badge of honor, commanding attention without saying much. But what really pulled my focus wasn't Brandon himself. It was Amanda and the way she seemed to change the moment she got near him. She wasn't just being friendly. She was leaning in close, way too close, smiling like a schoolgirl, laughing louder than necessary, placing her hand on his arm like they shared some secret. And the worst part? His wife was standing nearby, clearly uncomfortable, watching the whole thing unfold with growing tension in her eyes. I've been married long enough to recognize the fine line between harmless small talk and something far more questionable. And what Amanda was doing that night, that wasn't professional in the slightest. It wasn't networking. It was something else entirely, something that crossed a line. She was testing boundaries no committed person should ever flirt with, especially not in front of another man's wife. It wasn't just me who noticed. Across the room I locked eyes with the chef's wife. Her face said everything mine probably did too. Tight-lipped, eyes narrowed, posture stiff. She saw it. She knew. And for a brief second we shared a mutual understanding. I gave her a small nod, just a slight tilt of my head, the kind of silent signal that says, yeah, I see it too. Amanda, meanwhile, was in full performance mode. She was moving through the crowd like she was on stage, floating between conversations, laughing too loudly, being overly familiar, but somehow she always found her way back to the chef's station. Every pass seemed to grow more bold, like she was slowly shedding whatever restraint she had left. She began quizzing Brandon about his cooking techniques, but it didn't stop there. She dove into questions about his personal background, his goals, what kind of restaurants he dreamed of opening. None of it had anything to do with the menu he was there to present. She was digging, prying, asking things that had no business being asked in that setting. That's when someone slid up beside me. I turned and saw Lauren, the chef's wife. Her voice was low, sharp as broken glass. Your wife certainly seems to have an appetite for more than just the food, she said, not bothering to hide the edge in her words. I gave a small, wry smile. She's always been a fan of new experiences, I replied, doing my best to keep the tone light while still meeting her sarcasm with my own brand of diplomacy. We stood together, watching this bizarre scene unfold. Amanda now asking Brandon for a private demonstration of some technique. She pulled him away from his post, guiding him into a corner where they could talk more intimately. He kept his composure, standing straight and courteous, but his body language betrayed him. You could tell he wasn't comfortable. She was too close. Her eyes were locked on him like he was the only man in the room. And just when I thought the evening couldn't get more awkward, someone else joined the act. Felicity. I'd met her a couple of times before at Amanda's company events. She always rubbed me the wrong way, loud, nosy, and never one to respect personal space. Tonight she was no different. She appeared at my side like a bad memory, swirling a drink in her hand and wearing that trademark smirk that said she knew something you didn't. "Well, looks like someone's really working the room tonight," she said, eyes gleaming as she gestured toward Amanda and Brandon in the corner. "Is that what we're calling it now?" I asked, not even trying to mask the bitterness in my voice. Felicity let out a laugh, this strange mix of amusement and something else. Maybe mischief, maybe interest. Whatever it was, it felt calculated. "If I were in her shoes," she said, her eyes narrowing with deliberate focus, "I'd be paying a lot more attention to what I already had, right here." Her gaze didn't waver, it landed squarely on me, and it lingered just long enough to make sure I understood exactly what she meant. And I did. The irony of it all hit me like a slap. While my wife was off embarrassing herself with another woman's husband, her so-called friend was throwing signals at me like we were in some kind of twisted social experiment. No respect. No shame. Just lines crossed and lines erased. It was becoming more and more obvious that these women had no boundaries. They operated without any concern for consequences, as if relationships, marriages, were just suggestions, not commitments. I looked back across the room and watched Amanda, still fully engrossed in her little performance. She was getting more daring with every minute that passed. At that point, she was standing so close to Brandon that there was no way his wife, Lauren, could keep up the polite facade. Her expression was raw now, furious, hurt, betrayed. And honestly, I couldn't blame her. She was watching the same disaster I was, and neither of us could look away. Amanda, meanwhile, was blind to it all. Caught up in her own little fantasy, oblivious to the emotional wreckage she was leaving behind. But I saw it. I saw every part of it. I saw the disrespect, not just toward me but toward the other couple standing there with silent fury. I saw the betrayal, the kind that doesn't just sting, it burns. I saw the selfishness, the utter disregard for the vows we made and the people around her. At that point, it wasn't a question of whether this night would go off the rails. It already had. The real question was how far it would fall, and whether Amanda would realize what she'd destroyed before it all came crashing down. And then came the breaking point. As the night dragged on, her behavior went from simply questionable to outright disgraceful. The drinks kept coming and she wasn't turning them down. In fact, each one seemed to fuel her confidence, loosen her inhibitions, and push her further down a path she couldn't walk back from. I watched her head back to Brandon's station for what must have been the fourth or fifth time. By now, she wasn't even pretending it was about the food. She leaned against the edge of his prep table like she owned the place, planting herself firmly in his space. Brandon, to his credit, tried to keep it together, remaining polite, standing straight, answering her questions, but his body language made it clear. He was uncomfortable and he wanted out of that situation. "You must do a lot of heavy lifting in the kitchen," Amanda called out, her voice ringing out loud enough for half the room to hear. It was such a painfully obvious line, so forced and awkward, that even the nearby guests glanced over, eyebrows raised. There was a ripple of discomfort, like everyone collectively realized this wasn't just playful banter anymore. Brandon instinctively took a step back, putting space between them. But Amanda wasn't finished. She closed the gap again and casually reached out, her hand landing on his forearm. She let it rest there longer than necessary while smiling up at him. "I bet you've got some wild stories from behind the scenes in your kitchen," she said, her tone dripping with something that wasn't curiosity. That's when Lauren acted. She moved in like instinct had taken over, sliding between Amanda and her husband with the kind of precision only someone fiercely protective could muster. "Sweetheart, they need you over at the dessert table," she said to Brandon, her voice firm, calm, but cold as ice. Her eyes, though, they never once left Amanda's face. And Amanda? She was too drunk, or maybe too arrogant, to recognize the warning in front of her. Instead of stepping back, she grinned and offered the most condescending thing I'd heard all night. "Oh, don't worry, I'm just admiring his craft. You're lucky to have such a talented man." It wasn't a compliment. It was a provocation. A veiled jab disguised as praise. Lauren didn't flinch, but the shift in her expression was unmistakable. The annoyance vanished, replaced with something far more serious. Rage. Pure, silent rage. And while that storm brewed just a few feet away, Felicity continued to hover beside me like a bird of prey waiting for something to die. She edged closer with every passing minute, tossing out sly remarks, playing the role of concerned friend while clearly enjoying the show. "You know," she whispered, leaning toward me, "some women don't know a good thing when they've got it." She let that hang in the air before adding, "If that were my husband over there, I'd never let him out of my sight." Interesting philosophy, I said flatly, doing my best to stay unreadable. But every word she said, I was storing it away, another brick in the wall I was building between myself and this twisted little circle Amanda had surrounded herself with. Then the music kicked on, loud and upbeat like it was trying to distract everyone from the tension cutting through the room. And that's when Amanda crossed the line completely. Fueled by alcohol and inflated by her own inflated sense of confidence, she made her way over to Brandon yet again. No pretense, no excuses, just blatant disregard for everyone around her. She walked straight into the same mess she'd been stirring up all evening, and I could tell, she had no idea how close she was to blowing everything up for good. "Would you like to dance?" Amanda asked him, clear as day, reaching out her hand like they were the only two people in the room. The whole atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first, a lull in the background noise, then full silence. Conversations faded, heads turned. It was like time froze for a moment. Every eye in the room locked on the scene unfolding in front of them. Brandon looked stunned, like a man who just stepped into a spotlight he never asked for. You could see the hesitation on his face, caught between the need to remain polite and the instinct to protect his personal boundaries. He didn't know which way to move. But he didn't have to decide, because Lauren was already on it. She stepped in front of him, standing her ground. "He doesn't dance at work events," she said firmly, each word clipped and precise. "Company policy." Amanda responded with a laugh, loud, unfiltered, and soaked in liquor. It wasn't joy. It was defiance, the kind that dares someone to push back. "Oh, lighten up," she said, swaying slightly as she smirked. "It's just one dance. No harm in that." Lauren's voice didn't waver, but you could hear the edge sharpen. "Actually, it would cause harm," she snapped, her frustration finally breaking the surface. "It would hurt me. It would hurt your husband. And it would hurt my marriage." She took a breath and delivered the final blow. "So no, there will be no dancing." That was the moment things shifted from uncomfortable to outright confrontational. You could feel it. Other guests were still trying to look casual, holding drinks, making small talk, but their ears were tuned in. Everyone was watching now. Everyone was listening. Except Amanda. She was too far gone, too buzzed and full of herself to notice the crowd or the consequences. She waved Lauren off with a lazy flick of her hand, dismissing everything like it was someone else's problem. "You're being so dramatic," she slurred, smirking. "It's just a dance between co-workers." Lauren didn't let that slide. Her voice rose slightly, not yelling, but enough to cut through the music and murmur of the room. "Co-workers?" she repeated, eyebrows raised. "Lady, you do payroll. He runs the kitchen. You're not co-workers. You're just a drunk woman throwing herself at my husband." The words landed with weight. They echoed across the room like a verdict no one could unhear. Everyone in the vicinity heard it, and more importantly, everyone believed it. Except Amanda. She still couldn't see the damage she was doing. Her reality was so warped by the attention and alcohol that nothing was sinking in. And then she said the one thing, the one final nail, that ended it all. She turned toward Felicity, throwing her arms up like a stage actor in a play no one wanted tickets to, and declared loud enough for half the party to hear. "Honestly, I don't know why everyone's being so uptight. It's not like any of this matters anyway." And just like that, the room went cold. "I could drop him whenever I feel like it." That sentence didn't just land, it exploded in the middle of the room. You could almost feel the collective flinch. The atmosphere shifted from uncomfortable to devastating in an instant. And she was talking about me. Her husband. The man who had driven her to this party, who had stood silently in the background while she made a spectacle of herself, who had always supported her career, through late nights, office politics, and long, stressful deadlines. The same man who had been trying to make a marriage work while she was tearing it apart one cocktail at a time. The words had barely settled before Felicity pounced, like a predator that had been waiting all night for the right moment. Her smile widened, sharp and unapologetic. "Well," she said, projecting her voice so no one could miss it, "if you ever decide to drop him, I'd scoop him up in a heartbeat." Just like that, the circle closed. My wife had just publicly labeled me as disposable, and her friend, someone we'd both invited into our lives more than once, had declared her not-so-subtle plan to take my place. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice or storm out. I simply set my drink down, slowly and with intent. Every motion deliberate. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I wasn't acting from rage. Not anymore. I was operating from clarity. From strategy. Amanda was still laughing, still feeding off whatever validation she thought she was getting from this train wreck of a moment. She didn't even realize the grenade she'd just pulled the pin on. Maybe the alcohol had erased her sense of awareness, or maybe this was who she really was when no filter was left to catch the truth. Either way I saw it, and I was done pretending not to. I walked toward them, not fast, not slow. Just calm. Like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Her eyes met mine briefly and something flickered behind them, but it wasn't guilt. It was confusion, like she couldn't quite understand why the room had gone so quiet. It was just a joke, Amanda said, trying to wave it all off, her voice weaker now, lacking the bravado from earlier. A joke. I echoed, letting the word linger in the air between us like smoke. You know what's actually funny? She blinked. The idea that you think you're in any position to drop anyone. Felicity stepped in, her smile faltering as she sensed the shift in control. Look, we were just messing around, she started, trying to lighten the mood. It wasn't that serious. I turned to her, steady as ever. Messing around? I said, my tone still calm but colder now. Because it sure sounded a lot like you were publicly negotiating the handoff of another woman's husband, while she stood right next to you. I looked between the two of them. That's not flirting. That's not harmless. That's not fun. That's betrayal, dressed up as a party game. And just like that, the illusion cracked wide open for everyone to see. That's pathetic, Amanda snapped, her words slurring slightly now. But I saw it, the panic starting to creep in around the edges. Her act was slipping and she knew it. You're just jealous, she hissed, her voice low and tense. You're embarrassing yourself. I tilted my head slightly, genuinely curious. Am I? There was no heat in my voice, just a steady calm, the kind that made people lean in. Because from where I'm standing, the only one making a fool of themselves tonight is the woman who's been throwing herself at another man, all while her husband stood and watched. That hit her. Art. Her face, already flushed with booze and bravado, drained to a ghostly pale in a matter of seconds. For the first time all evening, Amanda looked stunned. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. Felicity, who'd been feeding off the drama like it was dessert, suddenly took a step back, pretending to check her nails or her drink, anything to avoid being part of what was unfolding. You want to know why they're staring? I said, gesturing around the room at all the silent, watchful faces. They're not staring because of me. They're watching because you turned this entire night into a disaster. They're staring because you've shown no respect, for our marriage, for yourself, or for anyone in this room. You're not being judged unfairly. You're just finally being seen clearly. That's when Lauren stepped forward, her eyes locked on Amanda like she'd been waiting all night for this moment. You know what? She said, her voice trembling slightly but full of conviction. I'm actually glad this happened. Amanda blinked at her, confused. I'm glad, Lauren continued, because now everyone finally sees what kind of person you really are. Amanda's mouth opened like she wanted to protest, but Lauren cut her off. You spent the entire evening flirting with my husband, disrespecting your own, and now you're trying to paint yourself as the victim? I was just being friendly, Amanda said weakly, clearly realizing how little power that word held anymore. Friendly? Lauren laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just hurt and a righteous kind of anger. No. See, I know what friendly looks like. What you've been doing all night. That's not friendly. That's predatory. You crossed every line there is to cross. And then, finally, Brandon spoke up. He hadn't said much throughout the chaos, but now, his voice cut through everything. It was steady. Controlled. But there was no mistaking the weight behind his words. I think it's time you left, he said, his eyes locked on Amanda. You've made this entire event uncomfortable, not just for me but for my staff, my wife, and our guests. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This kind of behavior is unacceptable, he finished. Amanda looked around then, her eyes darting across the room. Reality was setting in. The smiles were gone. The polite faces had vanished. Everyone saw her now, and not in the way she wanted. Whatever fantasy she'd been spinning in her head, it was over. And Brandon's words? They were the trigger. The match that lit the fuse. Because what followed wasn't just awkward glances or whispered gossip. It was the beginning of the fallout. It was a final farewell, though she didn't realize it at first. Amanda's face shifted through a storm of emotions in real time. First disbelief, then simmering anger, a flash of panic, and finally she settled into a mask of defiant rage. You can't kick me out, she snapped at Brandon, her voice loud, brittle. I work for this company. This party's just as much mine as it is anyone else's. And then came the voice that shut the whole room down. Actually, that's where you're wrong. All eyes turned. It was David, the regional manager. A man whose opinion held weight, the kind of weight that could end careers. He stepped forward slowly, face unreadable, though the tension in his jaw said enough. He wasn't pleased. Not even close. He looked around the room. There were no denials. No shrugs or uncertain expressions. Every face told the same story. Every single person had witnessed the unraveling of Amanda's dignity, live and in color. David turned to Brandon. Is it true? Brandon hesitated only for a second, then gave a short, solemn nod. Yes, he said. She's been hitting on me all night. My wife and I tried to set boundaries, but Amanda kept pushing. It's made the entire evening uncomfortable, for us, for my team, and clearly for her husband. You could feel the air being sucked out of the room. And I stood there watching it all happen, watching Amanda's world collapse in slow motion. And beyond harassing your staff, I added, stepping forward with quiet finality, she's also spent the evening publicly disrespecting her marriage, my marriage, in front of co-workers, clients, and upper management. You could almost hear the sound of Felicity's breath catching in her throat. She tried to vanish into the crowd, to melt into the background like she'd never been involved. But it was far too late for that. Her voice, her flirtations, her offer to scoop me up, had been heard by too many. Amanda's eyes widened. She realized just then that I had used her own words as the final blow. The very things she thought were clever, flirty, harmless, they were now sharpened and turned back on her. You're twisting this, she said, voice rising, desperate now. You're making it sound worse than it was. Am I? I asked, still calm, still deliberate. Because I'm pretty sure everyone in this room heard you say it. Would you like me to repeat it for them? And that's when David spoke again. I'll escort you out. It was like a gavel hitting a courtroom bench. Final. Irrevocable. The room froze. Conversations that had been reduced to murmurs fell completely silent. No one moved. All eyes were fixed on Amanda, the woman who had just lost everything in the span of 10 minutes. She spun around, scanning the room for someone, anyone to back her up. To step in. To save face. But there was no one. Not a single person met her eyes. Because she had burned every bridge. The very co-workers Amanda had spent the entire night trying to impress were now inching away from her like she carried some kind of contagious shame. No one was rushing to her defense. No one was making excuses. Even the catering staff avoided her gaze, suddenly busy with napkins or trays that didn't need handling. This was it. All the witnesses were in agreement. The whispers, the nods, the sideways glances, it all confirmed what had happened. She wasn't just being called out. She was being seen. The real her. And there was no spinning it now. Amanda stood completely outnumbered, cornered by her own behavior, and laid bare in front of everyone. I stepped forward, my voice steady, cutting clean through the growing tension. And now, I said, pausing just long enough to meet her eyes, we've come to the main event. She blinked, already unraveling. I could see the dread setting in, but I didn't stop. You said earlier that you could drop me whenever you wanted. I looked around to make sure everyone heard me. Well, congratulations. You got your wish. I took a breath, not for dramatic effect but because this next part had weight. Only, you're not dropping me. I'm dropping you. She went pale. Whatever blood was left in her face drained away in an instant. What are you talking about? She asked, voice cracking, eyes darting like she was looking for a way out. I'm talking about divorce, I said, calm and crystal clear. I'm talking about choices. Your choices. And now you get to live with the consequences of every one of them. Brandon stepped forward again, somehow still composed despite the chaos that had taken over his event. Ma'am, he said with quiet authority, I need you to leave. You've disrupted this entire evening and made my staff and guests uncomfortable. You're no longer welcome here. David, standing nearby, nodded toward the security team. Escort her out, he ordered. And make sure she's not allowed back on company property. This behavior won't be tolerated. The guards began walking toward her. No aggression, just purpose. Amanda turned to me in one last desperate plea. Her eyes were glossy now, tears mixing with panic. The alcohol, the shame, the sudden loss of control, it was all crashing down at once. Please, she begged, grabbing my arm, her voice shaking. You don't mean this. You don't want to be alone. We have a life. A home. I gently peeled her hand off my sleeve. I had a home, I said softly. But what you've shown me tonight, that's not home anymore. And those changes you're afraid of? They start now. And they start without me. The guards reached her, taking her arms, not with force but with finality. She struggled to plead her case, still believing that if she just said the right thing, someone, anyone, would save her from the consequences she had brought on herself. But no one did. And as they led her toward the exit, her protests faded into the background. She wasn't the center of attention anymore. She was just a reminder, to everyone watching, of what happens when you gamble with people's trust and take love for granted. The room remained frozen in stunned silence as Amanda was escorted out, her voice trailing behind her until the heavy doors shut with a final thud. And just like that, the noise returned, soft whispers, sidelong glances, people looking anywhere but at me. I stood there quietly, composed, doing my best to maintain the dignity that Amanda had carelessly discarded hours ago. Before I could leave, David approached. He looked serious, regretful even. "I want to apologize for what happened tonight," he said. "That kind of behavior has no place here. Not in this company, not at any level." "You don't need to apologize," I replied, meeting his gaze. "Actions have consequences." She made hers. "It's not on you." David gave a slow nod, then added, "If there's anything you need, references, documentation, support during the divorce, don't hesitate to reach out. What happened tonight wasn't subtle. 30 people witnessed it. No one's going to forget." I thanked him, then made my way toward the exit. Outside in the parking lot, the night air hit like a bucket of water, cool and sobering. That's when I saw her. Amanda. She was standing by my car, eyes red, makeup smeared, face streaked with tears. The same woman who had laughed off her behavior an hour ago now looked like someone who had just realized the cost of her actions. "We need to talk," she said, stepping into my path. "No," I replied, pulling my keys from my pocket without slowing down. "We don't. We're past talking. We're past everything." "You can't mean this," she said quickly, voice cracking under the weight of panic. "You're not seriously going to divorce me over one bad night?" That stopped me. I turned to face her. "You think this was just one bad night?" "Yes," she said, clinging to that delusion like a life raft. "Yes. I drank too much. I was being social, maybe a little too friendly, but it wasn't anything serious." I let out a breath, measured and slow. "You were accused of harassment. You embarrassed your boss. You got kicked out by security. 30 people saw it. And you still think this was just being friendly?" She swallowed hard, mascara running down her cheeks. "But I love you," she whispered. "Doesn't that count for something?" Her words hung there, suspended between us like a dying light. And for a second, just a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You want to talk about love?" I asked. "Love is respect. Love is showing up even when no one's watching. Love is remembering the promises you made when things get hard, not when you're at an open bar in front of half your company." She started crying harder now, shoulders trembling. "So that's it," she sobbed. 8 years gone? Over one mistake." I shook my head. "No, Amanda. This wasn't one mistake." I looked her straight in the eye and corrected her. "This wasn't just a mistake, Amanda. This was a pattern, and tonight it finally came into the light." My voice was calm, but every word landed with purpose. "How many times have you disrespected me when I wasn't around to see it? How many times did you joke with your friends that you could do better? How many times did you act like I was nothing more than a placeholder, something temporary, something disposable?" She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my hand. "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't answer that. Because the truth is, it doesn't even matter anymore." I reached for the door handle. "You say I'm abandoning you?" I continued. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just walking away from a woman who stood in front of a room full of people and said she could drop me anytime she wanted. I'm simply giving you what you claimed you wanted. The difference is, I'm the one doing the dropping now." Then I opened the door, stepped into the car, and sat down without another word. She pressed her face to the glass, still pleading, still trying to patch over what couldn't be fixed. Her words were muffled by the window. More apologies, more promises, more desperation. I started the engine and shifted into reverse. For one last second, our eyes met through the window. And I saw it: fear. Regret. The dawning realization that she had finally gone too far. I looked away. I didn't look back. Because there was nothing behind me worth holding on to. Nothing but a broken promise and a trail of hurt. What mattered now was what lay ahead. And for the first time in a long time, the road in front of me looked clear. It looked hopeful. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. She tried everything to stall it: phone calls, emails, even an emotional appeal to my parents. She wanted to renegotiate, to rewrite the story, to convince me and everyone else that what we all saw wasn't what we saw. But when 30 people are willing to testify to your behavior, when your own words are echoed back at you by witnesses, there's not much legal ground to stand on. The settlement was simple. She walked away with nothing she hadn't brought in. No alimony. No sympathy. No support from the friends she'd once held court with. Because they stopped calling after that night. Turns out, fair weather friends disappear fast when the storm rolls in, and you're the one holding the lightning rod. About a month after the divorce was finalized, I got a card in the mail. It was from Lauren, Brandon's wife. Inside was a simple thank you note. She wrote that Amanda's behavior at that party, as humiliating as it had been for everyone involved, ended up strengthening her own marriage. She said watching her husband remain respectful under pressure, and witnessing how I held my ground with composure, sparked some deep conversations between them. Brandon had been so unsettled by the events of that night, she said, that he started making an even greater effort to show appreciation for her, his actual partner. A woman who respected him and their boundaries. I kept that card. Not as a trophy but as a reminder. That sometimes, even in your lowest, most painful moments, something good can come out of the wreckage. That night, Amanda declared to a room full of people that she could drop me anytime. And in contrast, another man looked at his wife and chose to hold on tighter. The irony speaks for itself. Over the following months, Amanda tried to reach out. A text here and there, "How are you doing?" An email with a vague suggestion that we could maybe talk. A call I let go to voicemail. I never responded. She had lost everything that night, her job, her marriage, her dignity. And I think at some point she began to truly understand the price of the choices she made. The final message I ever got from her came about 2 months after the silence began. It was short. Just one sentence. "I'm sorry. I know it's too late, but I needed to say it." I read it once, then deleted it. Because some apologies don't need a reply. Some lessons only hit when there's nothing left to save. She once said she could drop me anytime. Instead, she dropped herself, right out of my life, out of my respect, and out of any future we might have had together. Funny how power works. She thought she had all of it. But in trying to prove that, she handed every bit of it to me. And I used it, not to hurt her, but to finally choose myself.